Thank you everyone. Hi Manang Marianella, hi
Hi,
Markee,
good
hi
morning.
Eugene. Good morning. On this amazing Sunday, we have amazing panelists to start off today's event. Our session is called Moving In Panel Exploring Immigration Experiences to the US. And the description is that as we transition into the second day of conference, we'll be acknowledging the experience of Filipino immigrants coming from various backgrounds, and especially with the diverse panelists of your experiences, we can't wait to just have a chat with the beginning of today's conference. So without further ado, I will be calling out an individual to introduce themselves briefly, and I will start with Manang Marinella. Will you introduce yourself to the rest of the attendees?
Good morning, everyone. I'm Marianella Jacob. I'm originally from Cavite City, Philippines, and I actually immigrated to the United States many years ago. I would say 1979, so about 41 years already. So I actually came in when I was about 21, 22 years old when I immigrated. So I'm actually a registered nurse, but I'm also an advanced practice registered nurse. I finished my background as a nurse in the Philippines from Far Eastern University, my Bachelor's of Science in Nursing degree. And then when I came to the United States, I decided to go back to school and took my master's degree and then my nurse practitioner's degree here in Hawaii. So I've been a nurse for all these years, and up to now, I'm still working and hoping to retire within the next 2 or 3 years. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Manang Marinella. Marky, will you introduce yourself next, please?
Oh yeah. Good morning, everyone. Thanks again for coming in. I know it's a really early morning on a Sunday for all the participants to be here. But we really do appreciate your time coming in. Like Manang Marianella, I actually moved here to the U.S. When I was 21. It was a week short before turning 22. My family decided to move here that time because I cannot turn 22 in the Philippines. Otherwise, I cannot come to the US because of the whole age cutoff thing. So I had to come to the US. But prior to that, I was in veterinary school in the Philippines. I was just a year short of graduating from my veterinary degree. That could have transferred over here had I finished it and took the boards. However, my family decided for me not to go back to the Philippines and study there. So I had to go back to study here. And when I started trying to fix everything to transfer and all, barely nothing transferred. Like I'd say probably like 3, 4 classes only transferred over. So I had to start over all the way back to zero. What I had worked on from my pre-vet all the way to vet school, that's nothing. It was just erased. So, but now I'm a fourth year, I'm a fourth year pre-med majoring in bio and Philippine language and literature with a concentration in Filipino. But I do speak both Ilocano and Filipino, both the programs that are offered in UH. But yeah, I'm a San Francisco transplant. So my family is back in San Francisco, grew up in Baguio, and now I'm here.
Thank you so much, Manong Marky. And last but not least, can we have the youngest introduce themselves?
Imbaga bigat yu amin. Good morning, everyone. My name is Eugene Marquez. First and foremost, I would like to thank the Balik Tanaw Conference Committee for having me today, as well as the supporting organizations and speakers that helped this conference come to fruition. I was born in Batac, Ilocos Norte, and grew up in San Nicolas, Ilocos Norte, where my dad was born and raised. My mom is from Bintare, Ilocos Norte, where I would also spend my time on to visit my mom's side of the family. I am the third child of my parents with 2 older brothers and 1 younger sister. I moved to Hawaii as a settler in 2009 when I was 9 years old, along with my dad and my 3 siblings. 3 years later, my mom came soon after my parents married each other. My family and I spent majority of our time here in Hawaii in Salt Lake, where I attended elementary, middle, and high schools starting in fifth grade. I am currently in my final academic year of my undergraduate journey, majoring in political science and Philippine languages and literature with a concentration in Ilocano. Again, I would like to thank you all for having me today.
Thank you so much, Eugene. Thank you so much for introducing yourself. And to also be formal, I want to introduce myself. My name is Chachie Abara. I am a senior undergrad at the UH Manoa, and I am majoring in psychology and Philippine studies with Ilocano concentration. And I am a immigrant. I came here to Hawaii at the age of 8 years old, and like many of us, I came to Hawaii not knowing a lot about our history, but through the classes that I've taken in UH, that further developed like what I know now today, and that is the birth of this conference. So to start us off, we're gonna dive into the first question, and since we all have diverse background, my first question is, what makes immigrating worth the hardship? And anyone can answer from this.
Oh, I could start. So, leaving the Philippines is very hard for me, considering when I left, I was very young. I was between 21, 22 years old, and I came by myself. The thing is, unlike most of the Filipinos, when they leave the country, they are with their parents or with their brothers or sisters. But technically, I came by myself because I came on a working visa. So I came as a nurse. I'm a professional, but I have no support. The thing is, I actually was sent to Chicago to work there. So I actually worked there for 20 years before I moved to Hawaii for the next 20 years of my life. So when I arrived, it was winter and I was young, and they put me into an apartment, and I quickly learned that I have to take care of myself and learn how to get by and be independent. So it was kind of hard, very hard for me that, oh, I'm by myself. I have to learn how to cook. I have to go how to take the bus, how to go to work. I have to keep myself warm. I have to buy everything for winter because it was winter at that time when I arrived, and you have nobody or support group to help you out. Like, okay, my work, whenever I go to work, the administrator is very, very helpful, and they said, Marianella, what do you need? You need socks, you need winter jacket, when you need winter underwear, you need all these things for winter. And I said, yeah, I want everything because I don't know what I needed to do. So it was very hard because you don't have family, and you don't have, like, if you can get sick or you're in stress or you need to spend your money, is this really worthwhile to spend, or is it safe for me to be really independent? So it was very hard at that point, and I realized it's really a big advantage if you move in with your family. Just like here in Hawaii, when you come in as an immigrant, that you are with family members, that you have a roof over your head, you have a father, an auntie, or a cousin, or somebody that can guide you with what you needed to do. So that's my experience.
Oh, Markee, we cannot hear you.
Keep doing that. All right. Well, you asked immigrating with the hardship. Actually, I would answer this in the point of view of my parents. Because for me, I myself did not want to move to the US. I'm a product of state universities in the Philippines. So I'm a product of the public schools. And we had this feeling of like kuliana, of giving back to the community because the community paid for your schooling. And that was like the whole thinking of state universities back in the Philippines. So I wanted to stay in the Philippines. I wanted to give back to the community because the community was the one who paid for my education. But then my parents were really the ones who wanted to move to the US because they're like, we already spent all this money. and they're all like, you would have a better life over there. My thinking was that, why can't I just have a good life here in the Philippines? But then again, the opportunities are in the Philippines are good for my could have been profession. But for what they did, it wasn't really that much. My mom is a professional teacher. My dad is an agriculturist, but they weren't practicing their profession. So we had a business, but that's about it. So our family moved here. And also, when we moved here, my dad actually was sick. So that was also one of the major drives for us to move here, is that for my dad to get healthcare over here. And so we did. He's better now. It's managed, like his condition is managed a lot better. And he's able to work now, because previously he had to stop working. So I guess what makes it worth it is my dad getting better. But for me, it was kind of a disadvantage, because I was a year left in my program back then. And then seeing all my friends become doctors. And now I'm like, okay, I'm left behind. Everybody is a veterinarian now. Or I have classmates that were that finished nursing school and then now finished their med school and now are residents. And I'm still like nothing. So there's that.
I guess my turn. So my paternal auntie actually petitioned my dad to come here when I was still like very young, probably like around 3 years old. So when he came here, he was able to carry me along with my siblings. So in a sense, I did not choose to immigrate from the Philippines. Um, but I did remember one of the things I did remember was like the last night before we got on the plane, where I couldn't sleep at all, knowing that we will soon be leaving our family, our friends, the place we grew up in, especially our mom, because at that time we didn't know when we will once again reunite with our mom. So leaving our mom was definitely the hardest part for me, but thankfully she was able to come here 3 years later. So leaving the Philippines as a young child who lived decently enough in the Philippines to understand my situation and position there, and settling in Hawaii gave me like a challenging in terms of realizing my own identities and um, having the sense of belonging. I always try to maintain the traces of my homeland, what I've been taught in my homeland. But sometimes a new environment has a completely different way of doing things, which challenges me to deal with having to what they call code switch in order to adapt to the new environment. So, having met this challenge, however, gave me the opportunity to learn more about myself and what is happening in the world, through different types of lenses and perceptions. So even up to now, I'm like constantly learning new perspectives and knowledge because I have the privilege of attending college, which, I believe should be a basic human right for everyone anyways. So this experience of immigrating from the Philippines and settling in Hawaii gave me the opportunity to navigate cultural fluidity, understand the differences we all have with others, being culturally competent about the position that we have as Filipinos in relation to the Kanaka Uivi, whose land we are all settling in and grew up in. Which was stolen by the United States and continues to be desecrated by the colonial system.
Thank you, everyone. And as much as I want to relate to Mana Marnella and Mana Markee's situation, I know coming to the U.S., coming to Hawaii at a young age, like I didn't know what to feel like. I just remember moving to Hawaii. I had to leave my friends. I had to leave the people. I had to leave my family. And one of the hard things about just moving here in Hawaii is leaving your grandparents that you never will actually see again because um, they may have passed on. And it was the harsh thing that coming to Hawaii, I felt like a sense of like disconnection and trying to bring up what Mana Marinella said about it's when we're immigrating here to Hawaii, to the US, it's hard moving here by yourself. Like you don't have that sense of support, that stability. And it's when it comes to just coming to a foreign country, it's a sense of how do I make myself um, available to where I'm able to understand what's going on around me. And this kind of ties into my next question, which is what kind of culture shock did you go through when you moved, and how did you work through it?
Okay. Um, I can go again because I'm the oldest of all of you, anyways.
Yes, Madam Marianella, you can go.
I can go again. So cultural shock, it's actually big, big for me. I mean, like when I first moved in Chicago, um, language is very big for me. Like I know I can speak English. I said I can speak English. I learned English in school, but how come when they speak to me, I do not understand what they're saying. For me, it's like they speak so fast and they have some accent that I have to ask them, excuse me, what did you say? Or can you repeat that again? And they will repeat it again. And and then I will understand. So it's something that you have to tune in your ears into how they say it, how they deliver a sentence or something, and then you can adapt to it. So in the beginning, it was so hard. The first few months of me, it was a shock. Like I said, I know I learned English in school and I speak English in and anywhere I can go, but how come their English is not deliverable? I mean, I cannot understand it. And a lot of slang words, you have to adapt to it, things that they say. I have to learn it quickly. Otherwise, I won't be able to get by. Yeah. I also realized that a lot of people will try to take advantage of you because you don't know what you're talking about or you actually don't understand what's going on coming from the country, and then you're here in the United States and they're like, okay, maybe somebody could take advantage of you. And an example would be like, you need to buy a car. Marianella, you can afford it. Buy a car. And he said, okay. And nobody will advise you. What kind of car do you need? How big of a car do you need? Where can you even park? I don't even know how to drive. Why do they want me to buy a car? So it's just buy the car. I said, oh, buy a car. I don't even know how to drive. So a friend of mine is as crazy as before. Like say, okay, I'm ready. Buy a car and deliver the car to my house because I cannot drive. Now, what kind of a decision is that? Like just buy it because you can afford it, because we nurses, we have enough money, just buy it and learn how to drive later. Of course I'm not going to do that. So but people will try to take advantage of you, and you being young, I was practically 21, 22 years old. I'm like, what is this? Why are people trying to take advantage of you? I had to tell my friend, I think these people is scamming us, and don't go and accept this kind of offers because it's just ridiculous. Yeah. So looking back, I remember that many people try to take advantage of you because you're a foreigner, you're a new immigrant. So right now, now I'm older, I realize when I see a new people coming in and they are new, I try to talk to them and give them advice that you have to really be very careful with people you meet, because some people will just take advantage of you being you are new. So because I remember from my own experience that things are coming all left and right trying to gyp you. Yeah, so it's a cultural shock. And I mean, coming from the country, we have everything different from what we have back home. Our people are very laid back, our people are very honest, and you have parents or relatives to advise you. But here in the United States, you have nobody. And if you are new, they won't tell you the other side of the coin. All they want is what benefits them if you purchase something. Yeah. Okay, you buy a land, you buy a car, you buy a property, everything is for the good of them because they make money out of you. But the disadvantage on your part they will not reveal it to you. So we all have to be very careful. Sometimes our own people tricks you. Yeah. So it's something that is a cultural shock for all of us, considering we are laid back people, we are honest, and and I don't know, culturally we don't want to be aggressive or verbally abusive to all these people who is trying to trick us into something. That's all. Thank you.
All right. Well, piggybacking to what Manang Marianella just said about you are on your own, I can definitely identify with that one because I moved here. I was already an adult. So I definitely saw that. People would really take advantage of you, especially if you're like what they say, fob, a fresh off the boat. If you're fob, people would just make you do work that you're not supposed to do, or you're paid, or like if you're already working, for example, let's say retail, you're doing twice as much as the others, but you're getting paid the same. So that's like one of the disparities that happens between somebody that was born here who works in retail and somebody who immigrated here that was in retail. That works in retail. So again, like Manang Marianella said, you're pretty much on your own. You have to stand up for yourself because the thinking here is very individualistic. So then you have to carry your own weight. Nobody is going to help you. It's very rare because even Manang Marianella was saying that even your own people turn on you. It was shocking for me because growing up in Baguio, not just in Baguio, but in the Cordilleras, we have this like notion of kailian and inayan, and you don't take advantage of your kailian. You help them, you uplift them. If they're having troubles, help them. That's what I grew up in. So I'm like, okay, this should be fine and blah blah blah. Moving here to the US, it was a reset button. I'm like, what the hell is this? So that was like one of the biggest challenges as a culture shock. Language-wise, it wasn't much of a problem for me because growing up in Baguio, we were taught it is in the whole in the entire country anyway. You're taught English as early as grade school. However, it's just the practice in Baguio is that you have to keep speaking English. So which was not bad because that was very helpful when we moved here. So my brother and I didn't have much of a problem, but our parents are the ones that had a problem because they had accents. They spoke English, but they had a hard time understanding what they were saying, and they can respond, but they stutter because they don't feel confident enough to speak up. Another culture shock maybe was when I went to school. It's more like, why are there no modules? Why are they relying on just one book? And I'm like, this is a very monocentric kind of studying. You're relying on just one book. I grew up, when I was in vet school, for one class, I had like multiple books. And I'm like, why? It just wasn't sticking to me. And then when I understood what was happening, I'm like, okay, they're making it easier for students. But my thinking was that you're limiting your students to just one resource. Like, you should extend the resource to your students. And then one more thing was that driving. You have to drive everywhere. In the Philippines, you can commute. There's Jeep, there's bus, there's taxi, and it's cheap. Here, commuting is even more expensive than having your own car. A gas here is about what, $3. But if you commute, one bus ride is what, $2.25. That's what you pay for 3 trips, and that's already 2 gallons of gas. So again, then the availability of public transportation here in the US is not as common as what you'd see in the Philippines. So that was like one of the biggest challenges back then, because when we moved, we didn't move to San Francisco. We moved to Marin. And up in the North Bay, in the Bay Area, buses come in only every hour. So if you miss your bus, then good luck with you. Wait another hour. So if you're late for your appointment, then you're really going to be late for the hour. Yeah, I think I'm just rambling. So I'll let Eugene speak.
You're good.
That was good though, Manong. That was really good. But yeah, I mean, I think Marianella and Manong Markee kind of like covered majority of the things that we, often would find as a culture shock. But I think one of the most like culture shock that I probably like went through, that we all probably went through, is the fact that there were a lot of cultures in Hawaii. This is Hawaii is considered a melting pot of cultures where we can like wherever you go, you will probably see someone from another group. Um, but I think in terms of like as someone who has attended school here majority of my life, I think I kind of like experience like a lot of the stereotypes that we would most likely experience. So having accents, a lot of my classmates in grade school learned the usual Filipino stereotypes like do you eat dog? Why are your food like smells this way? So a lot of these stereotypes I think was something that I found particularly shocking, because we, growing up in Ilocos, this wasn't something that we would experience. Yeah, but now that we have other people from no people from other groups, um it is kind of like an interesting experience, a unique experience that I know that we experience here in Hawaii.
Definitely, Eugene. And I just wanted to highlight what Manang Marinella said about like we have to, because as an immigrant, a lot of people do take advantage of us, especially because they see Filipinos as very caring, very laid back, and they're always trying to get something out of us. And it's like what we are always trying to grew up in is many people try to see Filipinos as, oh, they're very kind and this, so you should they will always continue to ask you favors. And you as a Filipino, as an immigrant, you don't know how to respond back because you grew up with with certain values in your own culture that kind of makes you want to be like kind, you don't want to cross that boundary. And I think that was really something that was so, I really wanted to highlight what Manang just mentioned, and to
Well, I want to add
transition
quickly
more.
to that one.
Yeah.
It's just that Filipinos tend to be very trustworthy. That when they see other Filipinos, I'm like, oh my God, now there's a little bit sense of relief. There's another Filipino here. Little did you know, this other Filipino is just taking advantage of you. So, see, Manang Marianella knows this. She's laughing at it. But yes, I've seen it because prior to going back to school, I worked in banking. And I would see these Filipinos coming in, and then they would tell me stories about when they just first came to the US. The other Filipinos were taking advantage of them. I'm like, that's horrible. I'm like, we're all Filipinos. We should be helping out each other. We're too trustworthy that we just like, okay, here's another Filipino. I think I can trust this person. But then later on, this being trustworthy, us we trust people too much becomes like a detriment to us. So yeah.
Thank you. And to move along with the rest of the question is, how do you keep in touch with life back home in the Philippines?
Technology.
I want to answer that, but I was just looking at the chat, and there was somebody asking about how was the transition from being non-confrontational to being confrontational in a daily basis here in the United States, because this comes with culture. I think this question is related to culture. So, I mean, as we mentioned before, that part of our culture we are trained to be laid back, do not be confrontational, you never answer back. If it's your parents talking to you, you just say yes to everything. And I think we carry that on when we move to the United States, and we don't tend to be confrontational. But after many years, like say for me, when I came, in the beginning, I was non-confrontational. I just say yes to everyone. And then when I go home, I realize I think something is wrong here. Why do I have to do all the work? Why do they give me the hardest area to work? Because that's how I feel in the beginning. I was always thrown to the most difficult task. They gave me the most difficult place to work because nobody else wants to work there. So I'm like, in the beginning, I'm like, okay, I'll work here because I'm contracted to work here. And then I have the worst patients to take care of, being a nurse. And I go home very tired. And I go home and I think, why do I have to do that every day? They always throw me to the worst place. And the rest of the nurses are not working as hard as I do. So I feel that like that's not fair. So it took a few months and even a couple of years, I think, that I realized that they're taking advantage of me. And I said, I better say something. So it took a while to realize that. And so I begin to train myself to be a little bit more assertive. So that's the proper way. So I said, I think I better be assertive and say something to them, and because this is not fair. So I went back to my administrator and I say, I think something's wrong here. And why are you putting me always in the fourth floor? That's the most difficult floor. And I said, I can't do this anymore. And he said, what are you trying to say? And I said, well, can you move me to the first floor? Because that's the most easy place. And of course, he's not going to do that because nobody else can work in the fourth floor, right? So he said, okay, I understand. It took a while, and they said, Mike was his name. I said, Mike, if you're not moving me, I think I'm just gonna go home to the Philippines because I can't stand working here anymore. And of course, he got threatened. I said, no, don't go, don't move. I'll move you, I'll change you, or I'll change your shift, or I'll move you to the second floor or third floor. So he's trying to make bargains to me, and so that I won't resign. So then I realized, wow, I could have done this long time ago, because they threw me there for such a long time because nobody else wants to work there. So I think being assertive a little bit, we need the training. We need the training among our new immigrants that they have to be a little bit more assertive so that they can voice out and they would know that they're being taken advantage. So you wouldn't know that in the beginning because you just say yes to everybody. Yeah. So that's something that we need to learn. But okay, going back to the question of how do we get in touch with people in the Philippines is I go home every year. I go home to the Philippines and visit relatives and friends, and so I miss the culture back home. I miss the people and my background. Even though I don't go home to Cavite, I just go home to visit my old friends. But I usually spend a lot of time in Bicol, where my husband is, and I enjoy the environment. I enjoy the people, and I enjoy talking stories with them. And I realize that I have more to offer. Yeah, I have more to offer, considering that I'm already close to retirement, and now we're into giving back to the community. Just like what Marquez has mentioned, that you are trained, that you wanted to go back and give back a little bit of something. So every time we go home, we try to share a little bit of wealth, not wealth in terms of give away food or give away services or train the nurses. We would like to go back and say and do like a little in-service here and there about what is the current trends in the United States as a way of going back to the community. We cannot detach ourselves to the Philippines. We still consider ourselves Filipinos. So I said it's since we can actually have the means to go back home and spend time there. So that's what we do. We like going back home.
Yes.
Thank you so
Adding
much,
on top,
Manang. Oh,
adding on top of that, oops, sorry. Yeah, adding on top of that, I think, we Filipinos are very collectivistic in nature. We always want to make sure that we, help each other. We don't leave anyone behind, especially those who we left in the Philippines. So, the same way that Manang Marianella is doing, my family and I would often give something to my families. And in terms of like keeping in touch with life back home in the Philippines, I think the most important, aspect is to, keep in touch with your family themselves. Yeah. So technology has advanced, you know, incredibly. So you have Facebook, you have Twitter, Instagram, and all of these social media that you can use to keep in touch with your family. So, um, we always love to communicate, like converse with my family back home, to make sure that they're doing okay. If they need anything, we can try to provide them what we can give them.
All right. Well, going back to what Tita Carolina's question is on from being non-confrontational to confrontational. Manang Marianella mentioned earlier that we always say yes because Filipinos are like yes sir, yes ma'am. It's always yes sir, yes ma'am. Especially if somebody that's telling you comes from a position of power, such as like a supervisor or somebody in politics or whatnot. We're because we're very respectful that we don't want to disappoint people. So we always just say yes. So that becomes a problem coming here into the US because, again, they take advantage of you such that if you don't confront this, then they'll just keep taking advantage of you. And look what happened to Manong Marianella. They put her on the fourth floor, which is the hardest area in the hospital. So it was kind of a learning curve because us Filipinos recognize power. We recognize authority. It's not really power, but we recognize authority. And we respect that authority. And once we're in that power of authority, we understand what people had to go through because we went through that. So then we don't abuse that power, except for what's happening in the Philippines now. But so with that one, we just have to learn how to compromise sometimes. I mean, we don't have to be very assertive. Yes, we have to be assertive, but to the point that we still are respectful because we are known to be respectful people. But then we have to learn to compromise, to find a way that it's a win-win situation and not just they win, you lose. So again, I think this is one of the things that new immigrants should learn, or like us people that are already established here in the US should tell new immigrants that, like, hey, if you feel like you're taken advantage of, speak up because nobody else is going to speak up for you. Because again, it goes back to the American culture of being individualistic. So you're on your own. You have to fight for yourself. So don't be a yes, ma'am, yes, sir.
I had to pause a little bit, but what was being mentioned, one thing that my mom would always tell me is that stop is stop always trying to allow people to take advantage of you. If there's something that you want to speak up for, go for it. And I grew up in this kind of environment I always grew up with a family that my mom always tell me that my mom sacrificed too much for me to stay silent. Like there is so much that we are capable of doing, and especially with what Mana Marianella said, what Markee said about how when it comes to us Filipinos, like yes, we're always trying to make amends and trying to what am I trying to say? We're always trying to
Please people.
trying to please people, and something that we need to rise up as, especially as Filipino peoples in the diaspora now, as we're moving in, is that we need to learn to be able to have that sense of accountability within ourselves and our own cultural values. So to I guess more transition is, who was the first person that made you feel at home in the States, and how did you make yourself feel at home? Or when was this moment when you felt at home?
Um, okay, so we here in Hawaii, it's easier to feel at home. You know, you feel at home because it's a tropical environment, and there's a lot of Oriental peoples are all here, and pretty much we all have the same culture, or almost similar in culture: Chinese, Japanese, Vietnamese, and pretty much not too difficult to adapt to the culture. But if Filipinos will go in the mainland, like New York, New Jersey, Chicago, it's totally different because the people there are more European background. So they have all mixed culture, and people tend to be also congregate in the same area where their people live. Example, in Chicago, when I used to live there, there are pockets of area, like the Italians will be in the Italian area. There's some Europe, like English people from England will be in one area. The Blacks will be in one area. The Filipinos will be in one area. So they typically segregate themselves. So like say, if you want to eat Italian food, you will go in the Italian neighborhood because you know the best restaurants are there. So I think people are also tend to be settling in with their own culture. So, but Filipinos, we want to assimilate. We want to try everything. So we want to be um, a mix up, or we want to make sure we are adaptable. So we try everything. Okay, I'm gonna go in the black neighborhood and eat food there. I'm gonna go to Italians and Polish or everything like that. So we tend to assimilate. But I think one of the biggest problem for us is just the language. Yeah. So we know we can speak, but our elders, our parents, our grandparents, they're not into the same category that you had learned. So we need to, and even for new immigrants, we have some new immigrants still coming in, and they are coming in as professionals already, but uh, language is very difficult for them. So aside from being assertive, I can see it from the chat, aside from being assertive, getting some assertiveness training, I think we also need a little bit of training in language. Like say, what are the common slang terminology that's being used in that place where you are? Like say you are in New York or you are in Chicago, so that you can adapt to everyday life. Otherwise, people will laugh at you. I've been laughed at many times, like, Marianella, what are you talking about? What do you mean? Because they don't understand also the way I speak, and I have to tune in or change my way of talking because it seems like I do not belong. So if you cannot speak, you do not belong. Yeah. So it's very difficult. We have to learn assertiveness and we have to learn language. That's from my standpoint.
All right. Well, I guess I can go next. Chachie, you asked about when was it like a moment that we felt home? Is that right? Okay.
Yes.
Well, I guess for me, because coming to the U.S., we first stayed at my uncle's house in California. So there was like Filipino food and all, so that felt home. We were with family and all. But the very first time I really felt like I was home was when I went to Seafood City, because then, because then I saw all this familiar food that I grew up in. And like I saw all this junk food, I saw all these pastries, I saw the fish that I grew up in, I saw the familiar fruits, the tropical fruits, the vegetables and everything. It was kind of an experience. It felt like, oh my God, I am home. I can buy all the food that I want. I can buy all the food that I'm familiar with. So that when I learned about like the closest Filipino store from where we lived, which is it's about 30 minutes away. Um, it it was kind of life changing for the most part, because then I'm like, okay, I don't feel like I'm gonna be alienated from the food and culture that I grew up in, because I can still go to this Filipino store, and it's a big complex. It's not just Seafood City. There's also Jollibee, there's Valerio's, there's Red Ribbon, there's the other Filipino like boutiques that sell barot saya and everything. So then that was, by the way, that's in Vallejo. And if you guys already know, Vallejo is such a big community of Filipinos actually live in Vallejo. So that kind of felt like home. But then after coming from Vallejo and then go back home to Marin, it's like the whitest place in the Bay Area. It just feels different again. It feels like, okay, I'm in foreign land again. I have to like rewire my brain again to like think American and not think Filipino. So yeah, that sometimes it gives you just like this feeling of like being home. But when I actually moved here to Hawaii, it's more like, oh, there is Ilocano food here. That is home. That's the feeling of home. There's that feeling of warmth. When I first went to Thelma's, I'm like, oh my God, the food is Ilocano food. I'm like, oh my God, I feel like the food is embracing me. It felt warm. There was the feeling of warmth brought upon by the nostalgia of like tasting what was familiar with what you grew up in.
With all the talks about food, I'm getting really hungry now. But yeah, in terms of like finding homes, I think, you know, I have been fortunate enough to be coming here to Hawaii with families already here. So in terms of like feeling home, you know, I do have my dad's side of the family, like all of them, my grandpa, my grandma, and all of his siblings. I was able to kind of like you know, have that better, you know, like an easier, if that makes sense, an easier transition from you know, being away from my family in the Philippines, but coming here to be with my family, if that makes sense. So, you know, I've always found home, you know, like in terms of being with the ones that I love. And, you know, like with that, I do think that we kind of like need to learn about where we are as, you know, where, you know, I don't know what I'm saying, but let me just stop there. But you know, like I've always had a good, you know, time in terms of finding my home because that's with my family, wherever my family is. Yeah.
Definitely. And I remember yesterday's session talked about how during the food panel that tasting food can, or how food can transport you back to the Philippines, and that's a really great way to tie things in. And just looking at the time, now would be a perfect time to for you three to ask each other questions that you may have within each other.
Actually, I don't know really what to ask Manong Marianella and Eugene. I'm kind of learning about them as you ask us these questions anyway. Um, so I'm not sure if the other speakers have any questions.
If there are no questions for, oh, what was that, Mana?
I was just thinking because of the age difference that my experience will be somewhat different from you, considering I moved in more than 40 years ago, and now, you know, as modern technology, and I would think that it will be easier for new immigrants to adapt to the United States. Yeah, so I thought that, I mean, having to live in two different places, like when I was in the Midwest compared to moving into Hawaii, I realized that it's easier to be an immigrant in Hawaii rather than be an immigrant in the East Coast. Yeah, East Coast or West or Midwest. So because first is actually the weather. You have 4 seasons, and you have to adapt to all the 4 seasons. Here in Hawaii, it's very easy. We use the same clothes all the time for the whole year, and the climate is very conducive, and the people are very warm and helpful. So it's a big advantage for new immigrants from the Philippines to move to maybe even California and everything in the West Coast and Hawaii, because it's the 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 people are more warm and more helpful, and the weather is also very helpful. So
And I think this has been mentioned a lot in the chat, and I think as immigrants, we are always forced to adapt and assimilate. And I think as new immigrants coming in now, um, and I'm really, really curious to ask you guys is how did you assimilate and how long did it take for you to assimilate?
For that first. It took me, I would say, about a couple years, which was kind of what I expected. Because there have been studies that for you to kind of get to know a place, it takes about a couple years. Because then first, what you have to overcome first is that getting familiar with the geography, like the physical geography of the area, because it's a totally new environment. Like you have to learn the streets, you have to learn where the closest grocery is, where the closest pharmacy, where the closest hospital is. So that was the first thing that you have to overcome. And then the second thing that you have to overcome is like, how do I get around? Especially if you don't know how to drive, then you'd have to figure out public transportation. And then you have to figure out the times of these public transportation. And then later on, you have to learn how to drive, and that the learning curve for driving, especially for older people. Well, I consider myself old because I learned how to drive when I was, I think, 24 or 25. Because back in the Philippines, I didn't have to. Like if you needed to go somewhere, there's public transportation, or you had a driver, so it wasn't a problem. But then here in the U.S., you're on your own, so like you had to learn that thing. And besides those personal challenges that you had to deal with, you also had to then deal with work, deal with the people around you. So that also takes another learning curve. So it takes a bit to assimilate, or I would not say really assimilate, but more like adapt. Because if you're assimilating, you're just taking everything in. Because what we want is to still keep the Filipino identity. You want to keep that. Filipinos are great. Geez, in the academe itself, I tell you, Filipinos are one of the smartest people on earth. I'm really telling you, because then, or it's just maybe we're smart because we are determined to complete a task, or we're diligent. It's more like the work ethic. We have the work ethic to get things done. And a lot of people here that grew up in the US are actually lazy. So then we become more successful, which is nice for us Filipinos. It's a good thing. But then going back again to your question on like how long it takes, I'd say about a couple years. But if you were younger, it's faster, especially if you came here as like in your teens. It's easier to adopt because then you go to school. So if you go to school, then you get to make friends, blah, blah, blah. But if you come here as an adult, your friends are your coworkers, and sometimes you don't get along with your coworkers, so that becomes a problem. So yeah.
I think Manang Nadine is provides, I mean, like, provided an interesting point on in the comments about assimilating and adapting to the cultures that we enter here. I do think that have being forced to assimilate, like Manang Nadine, is means that we are not being accepted as we are. I feel like we should practice practice our traditions and things like that without having the need to fear about what others or the dominant culture is telling us or perceiving us. And I think that's the problem that we have now in Hawaii, where communities of color like Filipinos, not only Filipinos, but also other Pacific Islanders, especially Native Hawaiians, where their cultures and traditions are being desecrated because we are being forced to assimilate into the American culture. We shouldn't be forced to do that if we are accepted as we are. And I think I do not, or I personally do not believe that we should assimilate into the cultures, because that's just telling us, we shouldn't be here unless we practice what the dominant culture is telling us to practice. So, you know, um, in terms of that, like I do think that, if this is something that we are facing, it's important to bring it up and to kind of like fight and, I guess, challenge what the dominant culture is telling us.
Definitely well said. And looking glancing over to the chat, and I actually want everyone to answer this question is: Philippine migration is often framed as Filipinos seeking the American dream. How have your experience interrogated and disrupted the concept of the American dream?
Mm. Okay, so first and foremost, I think it is important for us to acknowledge the brutal reality that the American dream was a tool that allowed the United States to influence people from the countries they colonized to contribute to the system that basically forced us to leave their homeland. Yeah. Through colonization, in the case of Filipinos were historically targeted to come to the US with the idea that America was this place of richness, wealth, prosperity. But our ancestors, the first Filipinos that ever came to the United States, ended up coming here to work in a colonial society, to be exploited. No, I want to reference Manang Nadine's presentation yesterday, in which she asserted that the Filipino migration was a part of a larger project of the American empire. Filipinos were considered uncivilized, savage, inferior, which gave the justification for the United States to colonize them, because while the Filipinos were unfit and uncivilized, the United States can transform them. No, the American educational system, which was a huge aspect to basically manipulate the idea of the United States being the best in the West into the mindsets of Filipinos, was heavily imposed onto our homeland to funnel Filipinos into thinking that they should pursue industrial and mechanical service, service industries, because that was what Filipinos were believed to be only useful for. Um, the American dream also contributed to us Filipinos and other settlers being subjugated to the masking of the history of Hawaii as a stolen kingdom, forcing the Kanaka Uivi community to face the consequences of being invisible to the consciousness of their land settlers. The idea of the American dream, which promised us equality, liberty, prosperity, unfortunately does not exist for us, because if it did, then why are the socioeconomic conditions of Filipinos in Hawaii lower than most major ethnic groups? Why were Filipinos heavily criminalized in the colonial legal system? Why are Filipinos amongst the groups with the lowest educational attainment? Why are Filipinos overrepresented in the service industry? So I do acknowledge the fact that some Filipinos, acquired some level of comfort, some level of riches and wealth. But why are most of us still suffering? We are suffering in terms of the COVID-19 situation. We are amongst the groups, like I think we are like the second group that has the most COVID-19 cases in Hawaii. So, why don't we see like our this idea of American dream being perpetuated into reality? Yeah.
Kind of want to piggyback on that one, and I think Marianella would be the one to like be able to tie this all up, having lived here the longest, and experienced everything that's happened with the whole American dream. So in the Philippines, we have this notion. So Eugene mentioned about like saying that the U.S. being like the best in the West, but the Philippines. So what was instilled during the American colonization is that the West is the best. It's not just best in the West, but the West is the best. So we have that feeling of inferiority for Filipinos, like coming here to the U.S. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna go to the U.S., get this, fulfill this American dream, blah 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 blah. But then we see all these disparities. Eugene was talking about earlier about equality, liberty, prosperity, and all that stuff. But then you see these professionals leaving the Philippines, coming here to the US. And when I was working in banking, I've met engineers, dentists, successful professionals back in the Philippines that work as what? Caregivers, they work in retail, at Target. I met a doctor that works at Target, for crying out loud. You are a doctor in the Philippines. So there is that brain drain too. Like, besides trying to fulfill the American dream, what's sad is that there is a brain drain in the Philippines. All the best ones that we have are leaving because then they still think that there is this American dream, that it will make my life better, blah, 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 blah. But then you come here to the US, you are hit in the face with this harsh reality that you have to start over again. And that it's not always the case that you will get what you want. So this whole concept of American dream is not always true for everyone, because even Eugene was talking about earlier that how the Filipinos that moved to Hawaii were all taken advantage of and started. They were the least paid people working in the plantations, and then now also you see all these Filipinos working in the service industry, and they're given the worst schedules, or they're being exposed to the worst environments. So where's the American dream of equality there? Sure, you get more money. If you convert the dollar to peso, yes, that's 50 pesos. That's a dollar, let's say, is already a happy meal in the Philippines. But then the quality of life for you working here in the US, you're working like a Carabao, like they say in the Philippines. It's even worse. So then that we have to change that concept of American dream, especially for Filipinos moving from the Philippines. It is actually a struggle coming here, and you have to start over again. It's not always sunshines and rainbows and all that stuff. So then that story of, not story, but like the concept of American dream should be more of like, hey, there is this opportunity, but you have to work for it. It's not just, oh, you're gonna go there, you'll be good, you'll make a lot of money, then you can send this money back home. That's ridiculous. I guess I'm just starting to ramble now, so I'll let Marianella say. I'm just like ranting at this point.
Thank you, Markee and Eugene. But for my own experience, as I said, I came here on a working visa, so I already came as a professional, and I realized that America needs some specific professionals to help them out, and you will be paid well. So I came as a nurse, but I have to meet criteria. I have to pass the boards. I have to make sure that my background is commensurate to the American standards, because looking back, we all have different standards back home in the Philippines, but I was lucky enough to pass the state boards, and then my license is just as good as anyone. So now I train myself. I went to the hospital. I have to learn all the techniques. I have to learn all the skills and be commensurate to the standards of American healthcare. So it's not only because you have your educational background back home, but you must also be diligent and work very hard to pass all the requirements here. So if you are a doctor, you need to pass the boards. You have to go into training. We all have to work very hard. So it pays off after a while if you have to comply with the requirements. So right now here in Hawaii, I have met people still coming from the Philippines that they are engineers, they are bank people, and they came on a working visa. So I didn't realize that we are still hiring professionals from back home. And just like Marquee is saying, there's brain drain. So right now there's brain drain because you don't get paid good enough when you are home. So, I mean, I could be a professional back home. I can be a nurse over there, but probably at this point in my life, I probably won't be able to own my own house. I won't be able to feed my family. And so I decided to move on and went to the United States. So, I mean, at this point, we still have to realize that America will utilize you if your background is useful to them. Yeah. So, I mean, like farming in California, how many people wants to farm over there and get paid a little bit of salary? So then they take different culture, or they hire migrant workers to farm for them. So we also have Filipinos doing that. I mean, they hire migrant Filipinos to farm in the land. So, I mean, you don't need education to do that. You don't need college education. So just to earn a little bit of money, our own Filipino workers will have to work there and be paid. So it's not looking into, are we being exploited because we don't have education and we are just being paid a little bit of money? So it's a choice. It's a choice for us. What do you want to do? Do you want to be educated and get more money and meet all the standards, or just work menial jobs and be paid little amount of money? It's how you look at it and say, are you being exploited because you don't have education? It is a trend of thought that it's very hard to actually debate on. Yeah, so we could go on all day and say, okay, these people is being exploited, but how much can you do, or how can you help them to get better? So, I mean, looking back, I even remember my father barely finished high school, and he mentioned to me, you need to go to school. And I said, well, I like going to school. I told my dad, I like going to school. But he said, because you can get better work or get better pay when you go to school. I said, okay, but there's 7 kids in the family. We cannot send 7 kids in the family. We can't afford it. So I'm second from the eldest. And my father said, we can only afford one to go to school. Can you believe that? Between 7 of us, I was the only one sent to school. My brother, the oldest brother, said, I'll give you my chance. He said, I'm not going to school, so you can go to school. I was crying, and I felt like my brother gave me way so I can go to school, because we can only afford one. So there's four older siblings, and they all said, Marianella, you go to school. I felt privileged that I have to go back there, and I felt, up to now, I'm already 63 years old. I still think back and I say, my brothers and sisters paved way for me to go to school. So I think I need to go back there and help them out. Yeah. They turn out, after a while, they turn out to be successful immigrants too. But I look back and I say, if my brother had decided to go to school, I'm left out. I'm nowhere to go because I cannot go to school. Only one can go. And so early on, I realized we have to go to school because that's a way for us to get better. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Marianella, Mana Marianella, for sharing your thoughts. Thank you, everyone. And just to little wrap things up, yes, the concept of American dream, it's always something to tell the people to come to the US to say something, but in actuality, it's not the entire truth. And something what Mana Marianella brought up in the beginning is it's always one-sided coin. They don't show us the entire picture of what it is to immigrate here. We are always being forced upon different values that cause us to think that we should move to move to the US to make our situation better. But in actuality, in every place that we are, whether it be in the Philippines or anywhere around us, we are just as strong people. And at the same time, we need to stop also glorifying the idea of resiliency, because as Filipino people, we have so much to unlearn from. And as to go from this, does anyone from the panel have any closing thoughts as we move on to, as we continue to close this session, that you would like to leave to the attendees?
Again, I would like to thank Chachie for moderating us today. Manang Marianella and Manong Markee, thank you for speaking with you today, and to all the audience that were listening to us today. Also, thank you for participating.
Well, thank you as well to our co-panelists here, and thank you for coming to our event. I think any like some parting words I would say when it comes to immigrant experience is that when you see someone that just moved from the Philippines to here, try to help them out. They need all the help. It's not easy moving to a totally new environment. Like I said, it's a reset button. You're pretty much hitting that big reset button in your life. So try to be more understanding, and help them out, because that's the only way for us to overcome all these struggles for all these immigrants coming in to the U.S. And again, everyone have a good day. I think Manang Marianella would like to say something as well.
Yeah. Well, thank you for the opportunity. Thank you, Marquee, Eugene, and Chachie for moderating. I mean, it's an opportunity for me, and I appreciate it. And I hope to see you guys again another time.
And with that said, thank you, everyone. I really learned a lot, especially from all your experiences. And as always, the next session will be starting in a little bit soon. So feel free to join into session 6 as we start the session with Anna. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.